Hello, Revolve Bible Church. Pastor Jake here. This is the second installment of our series, What is the Gospel? Looking at the book of Romans and tracking through with Paul as he articulates gospel truths to us. We're wanting to understand what is the good news. And as we go through and follow Paul's train of thought in his letter to the Romans, we come across the subject of God. And we find that in Romans 1, verse 18. Where he says, "For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men." You see, before we can actually get to the good news, we have to come across the bad news. Not to say that God himself is bad news, but it's his character and nature, and it is really his reaction to humanity. His reaction, as described by Paul in Romans 1, verse 18, is one of violence. It is one of judgment and condemnation. And we have to understand that this is really in light of him being holy. When we say that God is holy, we are really saying two things. Number one, that he is set apart. He is in a category of his own. There is no one like God. We can't compare God to anything that we see around us in creation in a perfect sense. Now, in a sense, being created in the likeness, in the image of God, as Genesis 1 and 2 talks about, the Imago Dei, we do have some corresponding similarities with God. We do share some attributes with God that are communicable, as theologians would put it. But there are also incommunicable attributes of God that we don't share with God that sets him apart from all else. And with God's holiness, with him being set apart, we not only mean that he is in a category of his own, there is none other like God. But also, when we say he's holy, he is morally pure, perfect, and flawless. There is no sin in the Godhead. But God, being sinless, being pure, being perfect, has a violent reaction in needing to punish sin. Sin must be dealt with by a holy God. If it's not dealt with, then God ceases to no longer be morally, perfectly pure and flawless in every way. But to condone, to accept sin would be an affront, an assault on his very character. So God must deal with sin. In Romans 1, verse 18, Paul explains that. God, and we even see that back in Genesis 3, where the perfect couple, Adam and Eve, the moment that they rebel and sin against God, doing what he told them not to do, he kicks them out of the garden. He reacts with aggression. And we see God working in the same way in Romans 1:18. God does not accept sin, but he deals with it by his wrath. And that is true for everyone, every sinner, as we'll look tomorrow, who is born into sin. Everybody falling short of the glory of God is born into sin and stands in the crosshairs of God's almighty fury. But we also find in Romans 3:16 that God so loved the world. He loves those who have transgressed and who have missed the mark, who have sinned against him, so much so that he acts according to his grace to send a Savior. But when we understand the gospel, we first need to understand that our relationship with God is not a good one. Everyone has a relationship with God, but ours, apart from a Savior, is not a good one. We stand condemned. We are the target of his wrath. And tomorrow I will explain why that is. Because you might be asking, well, why is God mad at me? What did I ever do that deserves God's condemnation and eternal judgment? Well, tune in tomorrow as we're going to find out why.